The wind howled through the frozen wilderness like a restless spirit that refused to sleep. The sound carried across the endless expanse of snow and pine, cutting through the night until it reached the ear of a lone hiker making his way down the desolate trail near Fairbanks, Alaska. His name was Eric Dalton, a seasoned woodsman who had spent most of his life wandering through these unforgiving landscapes. He knew the wilderness, knew how it could turn cruel without warning, how it could swallow a person whole without leaving a single footprint behind. But that night felt different. There was something in the air, a heaviness, a silence that felt almost deliberate, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. His flashlight beam danced over the snow, catching glimpses of frost-covered branches and animal tracks. Then something unusual caught his eye, a dark shape half buried near a frozen creek bed. He stopped. It wasn't an animal carcass or a fallen branch. It was fabric. He knelt, brushed away the ice, and revealed the corner of a worn canvas backpack. When he pulled it free, the strap snapped, brittle with cold. The bag was torn open, its contents scattered around. Photographs, a cracked thermos, a notebook soaked through with melted snow, and a wallet. He opened the wallet carefully, his gloved fingers trembling as he read the name printed on the driver's license inside. Sarah Whitman. Eric froze. He remembered that name. Everyone in Fairbanks did. Sarah Whitman, the wildlife photographer who vanished 6 months ago while documenting Alaska's untouched wilderness. Her story had been on every news station, her smiling face on every missing poster pinned to gas station walls and post office boards. She had been young, passionate, and fearless, known for venturing deeper into the wild than most would dare. She'd told friends that she wanted to capture the soul of Alaska, the raw, untamed beauty of its landscapes. But the last anyone saw of her was a post on social media showing a red Jeep parked on a snowy road, a caption beneath it that read, "Into the silence I go." Eric took a step back, his breath fogging the air as dread crept up his spine. The forest around him felt suddenly alive, not welcoming but watchful. He could hear faint creaks and whispers in the distance, though there was no wind strong enough to make the trees move. His instincts screamed for him to leave, but he forced himself to stay calm. He grabbed his radio and called for the Alaska State Troopers, his voice breaking slightly as he reported what he'd found. Within the hour, the sound of snowmobiles cut through the night, followed by flashing blue and red lights painting the snow in eerie shades of color. Detectives and troopers fanned out across the area, marking off the scene with fluorescent tape. Cameras flashed, boots crunched, radios crackled. The snow was still falling softly, trying to cover the evidence as quickly as they uncovered it. The backpack was carefully sealed and taken away. Nearby, officers uncovered a trail of faint footprints leading toward the tree line but disappearing abruptly at a frozen patch of ground. They found no sign of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away. It was as if Sarah had stepped off the face of the earth. The lead investigator, a man named Jim Rourke, had been on dozens of missing persons cases before. But something about this one bothered him. Maybe it was the location, this desolate, isolated valley miles from the nearest sign of civilization. Or maybe it was the atmosphere, the sense of quiet that felt too heavy, too unnatural. The forest seemed to swallow every sound. Even their voices felt muted, as if speaking too loudly would disturb something ancient and unseen. When the evidence team examined the recovered items back at the station, they made a chilling discovery. Inside Sarah's backpack was a camera, its metal frame scratched but still intact. The SD card had miraculously survived. When they loaded the photos onto a computer, the images appeared one by one. The first few were breathtaking. Snow-capped mountains, the shimmer of the northern lights, the delicate footprints of a wolf trailing across a frozen pond. Then, as the sequence continued, the tone shifted. The images became darker. The angles grew more erratic, the focus unsteady. There were shots of the forest at dusk, of the same tree line from slightly different distances as though she had been moving while taking them. And then came the final photo, grainy, blurred, and off-center. It showed something standing between the trees. At first glance, it looked like a trick of the light, a shadow caught mid-motion. But when the image was enhanced, the outline became clearer. It wasn't an animal. It was upright, human-shaped. A figure shrouded in darkness, its proportions just slightly off, as if it were something pretending to be human but not quite succeeding. Rourke stared at the image for a long time, his jaw tightening. "Could be another hiker," one of the techs muttered. But Rourke shook his head. The angle of the photo, the timing. It was taken late at night, deep in a part of the forest no sane person would wander alone. And Sarah's notes found in the backpack painted a disturbing picture. Her last entry, dated 2 days before her disappearance, read, "I hear it again. That sound, like someone breathing in the dark. It's close now. Watching." When the media got wind of the discovery, the story reignited across Alaska. The missing photographer's belongings found after 6 months of silence. The haunting photograph that seemed to capture something lurking in the wilderness. People speculated wildly. Some blamed a bear attack, others suggested foul play. But a few whispered about something older, a legend that had lingered in Alaskan folklore for centuries. They spoke of the Watchers of the Wild, spirits that roamed the woods, punishing those who trespassed too deeply into their domain. Eric Dalton tried to stay out of the spotlight, but reporters tracked him down anyway. He told them he still couldn't sleep, that every time he closed his eyes he saw that backpack half buried in the snow, saw the camera flash in his mind, heard the whisper of wind that didn't sound like wind at all. It felt like she was still out there, he said quietly during one interview, like the forest hadn't let her go. In the days that followed, troopers combed the area where the backpack was found, searching for any sign of human remains. The search stretched for weeks but yielded nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not even tire tracks from her red Jeep. The landscape itself seemed to resist giving up its secrets. Equipment malfunctioned, GPS signals dropped, and compasses spun in slow circles. Some of the searchers refused to go back after dark. One of them claimed to have heard a faint clicking sound echoing through the trees, rhythmic, mechanical, like a camera shutter going off in the distance. By the end of the 3rd week, the operation was called off. The official report listed Sarah Whitman as missing, presumed deceased. But among the troopers who had stood out there in the cold, few truly believed it was over. The forest had taken her, and whatever it was that lived within it didn't want to be found. As night fell over Fairbanks again, snow drifted down gently, covering the frozen earth where her story had ended, or perhaps only begun. Somewhere deep in the dark, a faint flicker of light moved between the trees like the flash of a distant camera capturing what the world was never meant to see. And though the wind carried nothing but silence, it seemed to whisper her name through the stillness. Sarah. Detective Owen Carter had seen more than his share of strange disappearances during his 20 years with the Alaska State Troopers, but this case refused to let him rest. Sarah Whitman's name haunted his notes, his thoughts, and his sleep. The forest where her belongings had been found seemed to pull at him, demanding answers he wasn't sure he wanted to find. He'd worked on cases where people simply vanished. Lost hikers, hunters swallowed by blizzards, travelers who took wrong turns into nowhere. But this felt different. The evidence didn't behave the way it should. The facts twisted around each other like the trees in those woods, gnarled and stubborn. When he first reviewed Sarah's file, the details stood out immediately. Experienced hiker, knew the terrain, traveled alone often but always checked in through satellite phone or social media. Her final transmission, sent from a remote area north of Fairbanks, was a short text. Made it to Screamer's Ridge, stunning view. After that, nothing. No messages, no signals, no signs of life. Her Jeep was gone, her camp vanished. For months, her disappearance was just another tragic mystery, until the backpack surfaced. Owen spent the next week poring over the photographs recovered from her camera. He'd studied crime scene photos all his life, but these were different. They felt alive, like each frame was holding its breath. The early images were peaceful. Sarah smiling in front of her tent. Auroras dancing over the snow. A lone wolf staring directly into the lens. Then the tone shifted. The pictures became darker, the framing uneven. The camera tilted as if she had been running or stumbling. In one photo, the sky was heavy with fog and a shadow stretched across the snow, elongated and unnatural. In another, her campfire flickered low while something faintly glimmered in the distance. Two pale lights hovering between the trees like eyes. The final photo stopped him cold. It was almost entirely blurred, but behind the streaks of distortion, a shape could be seen. It was tall, motionless, standing halfway behind a pine trunk. The outline faintly humanoid but wrong, too narrow, too elongated, with something about the posture that unsettled him deeply. He leaned closer to the screen, noticing a faint smear of light near the lower edge. It looked like a handprint pressed against the lens from the inside. He had the images analyzed by the digital forensics unit, but they couldn't explain the anomalies. There were no signs of editing or camera malfunction. The timestamps were consistent, the exposures normal, yet the lighting in the last few frames made no sense. It was as if an invisible light source had appeared in the middle of the night, washing everything in an unnatural glow. Sarah's journal offered even more questions. The entries were organized at first, careful observations about wildlife patterns, temperature readings, and photography notes. But as the days went on, her handwriting changed. It grew rushed, uneven. She wrote about strange sounds echoing across the valley, faint mechanical clicks at odd hours, and a voice she thought she heard whispering her name through the wind. Her last entry read, "It's closer tonight. I think it knows I'm watching too." Owen rubbed his temples as he read. This wasn't just a case of a missing photographer anymore. It felt like walking into a story that didn't belong in reality, something that belonged in folklore. Locals in Fairbanks had their own explanations. Some blamed isolation. Others said Sarah had lost her mind in the solitude of the Alaskan wild. But older residents whispered of something else. The Watchers of the Ridge, spirits said to dwell in the places where compasses failed and time felt distorted. One night, unable to shake the unease, Owen decided to visit the location himself. He took 2 troopers and a wildlife expert, setting out before dawn with snowmobiles. The forest was silent when they arrived, its trees leaning inward like ancient guardians. The ground was layered thick with untouched snow except for faint depressions, too small for animals, too uneven for human footprints. As they moved deeper into the valley, the air grew colder. The temperature on his digital gauge dropped abruptly from -15 to -30 in seconds. Then the radios began to cut out. Static hissed in their earpieces, a low hum followed by a series of clicks. It wasn't random noise. It came in patterns, like someone trying to speak in Morse code. The wildlife expert, a woman named Riley, frowned and tapped her headset, but it didn't help. "It's this area," she said. "Magnetic interference. Happens near Screamer's Ridge." The name made Owen uneasy. According to local legend, the ridge got its title from the wailing sound that echoed through it on winter nights. Though no one could agree on the cause. Some said it was wind moving through the frozen caverns. Others claimed it was something far less natural. Owen wasn't superstitious, but the deeper they went, the heavier the silence became. It wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, like the forest was absorbing their presence, listening. Near what had once been Sarah's campsite, they found the remnants of a small fire pit buried under ice. Her tripod was still standing, its legs frozen in place, the camera mount broken. They also found scratches on a nearby tree trunk, long, deep grooves that didn't match any known animal claw marks. Riley ran her glove over them and whispered, "Something tall made these." As night began to fall, the team set up temporary shelter, deciding to document the area in low light. Owen turned on his body cam and swept the area with his flashlight. At first, all he saw were the endless silhouettes of trees. But then, for the briefest moment, something moved between them. A shape, slender and tall, gliding more than walking. He blinked and it was gone. They stayed one more night. That was his mistake. Around midnight, Owen woke to a faint clicking sound. It was distant at first, then closer, rhythmic, like a camera shutter. He sat up, scanning the dark. The others were still asleep. He unzipped the tent slowly, his breath misting in the cold air, and peered out. The forest was motionless, silver under the moonlight. Then the sound came again. 3 clicks, a pause, then 2 more. His flashlight beam cut through the dark and landed on a patch of trees about 50 yards away. Something was standing there. He couldn't make out the details, but it was tall, too tall. The figure didn't move. It didn't flinch at the light. It simply stood as though watching. His heart pounded and every instinct told him to retreat. But he raised his camera and took a photo anyway. The flash illuminated the area for a split second. When the light faded, the shape was gone. The next morning, Owen reviewed the image. It was almost identical to Sarah's last photo. The same blurred outline, the same faint handprint near the edge of the frame. He didn't tell the others. When they packed up to leave, he looked back one last time at the ridge. The forest looked calm again, untouched, as if it had been waiting for them to go. Back at headquarters, he uploaded the photo into the system and froze. The timestamp didn't match when he'd taken it. It showed 12:03 a.m., the exact same minute Sarah's final photograph had been captured 6 months earlier. For weeks afterward, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him back. He'd wake at night to the faint sound of clicking somewhere in his apartment. At first, he thought it was the pipes or maybe a distant clock. But when he checked his phone, the voice recorder he used for field notes sometimes activated on its own, capturing silence, and then a whisper so faint it barely registered. You saw it too. He tried to rationalize it all. Stress, fatigue, a mind frayed by too many hours buried in unsolved cases. But deep down, he knew this wasn't imagination. The wilderness had its own rules, and Sarah had trespassed on something ancient and unknowable. Now it was as if that same force had turned its gaze toward him. He filed his report with only the verifiable details. No mention of the clicking, no mention of the figure. But he couldn't bring himself to close the case. He printed out Sarah's last photo and pinned it above his desk, next to the one he took himself. They were nearly identical. 2 snapshots separated by half a year and an impossible coincidence. Sometimes when he stared at them for too long, he swore the blurred shape in the background seemed to shift slightly, as though inching closer with every glance. Owen knew then that Sarah's disappearance was no accident. No simple case of a hiker lost to the cold. Something had found her out there. Something that didn't want to be photographed, something that didn't want to be seen. And now perhaps it was making sure the next person to look too closely would vanish just the same. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets, blanketing the valley in white as Detective Owen Carter returned to Screamer's Ridge alone. It had been weeks since his last visit, but the images refused to leave his mind. The blurred figure in the photos, the sound of the camera clicking in the dark, the strange coincidence of timestamps, it all gnawed at him like a persistent echo. Officially, the case had gone cold. The department had moved on, and the world had forgotten Sarah Whitman. But Owen couldn't. He had spent sleepless nights replaying her final steps in his head, tracing her path across maps until the lines blurred together. He needed answers, not for the file, not for the department, but for himself. He parked his snow-covered truck on the narrow, icy road where Sarah's red Jeep had once been spotted in a grainy photograph from her social feed. The world was utterly still. No wind, no birds, not even the sound of branches creaking. The forest loomed ahead like a wall, each tree standing tall and silent, their black trunks stark against the snow. As he stepped out, his boots sank deep. the crunch of his movement sounding impossibly loud in the emptiness. He carried a backpack with essentials: a camera, a flashlight, spare batteries, and a small voice recorder. But what weighed most heavily wasn't in the bag. It was the growing sense that he wasn't just returning to investigate a disappearance. He was stepping into the same trap Sarah had fallen into. By midday, he reached the clearing where her last camp had been found. The place hadn't changed. The charred remains of a fire pit sat beneath a crust of ice, and the outline of a tent was still faintly visible, like the ghost of something once living. He found the tripod still there, half buried, metal eaten away by frost. He brushed the snow from it and noticed deep scratches on the ground beneath, as if something heavy had been dragged away from the camp. He crouched low, examining the pattern. It wasn't animal. It looked almost like the imprint of fingers, long and uneven, pressed into the earth. He set up his own tent beside the ruins of hers, lighting a small fire as daylight began to fade. The air was painfully cold, the kind of cold that burned the lungs with every breath. He warmed his hands by the flames and switched on the recorder. "Detective Owen Carter," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly. "Day 1, Screamer's Ridge. Recreating the final night of Sarah Whitman. Temperature -27. Visibility fair. No signs of wildlife." He paused, then added, "The forest feels aware. I don't know how else to describe it." As night crept in, the shadows lengthened. The light from the fire flickered against the trees, creating the illusion of movement all around him. Every so often he thought he heard something, soft crunches in the snow just beyond the glow of his camp. He told himself it was the wind or a fox moving through the brush, but deep down he knew it wasn't. The forest had gone too still for that. Around midnight, a low wail rolled through the valley, rising and falling like a siren buried beneath the ice. The sound made the hair on his neck stand up. It wasn't an animal. It was too long, too mournful, almost human. He grabbed his flashlight and scanned the tree line. Nothing. The sound stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. He turned back toward his tent, and that's when he noticed it. Small depressions in the snow leading away from the fire. They weren't his. He followed them with trembling hands, his beam shaking as he moved. The tracks were spaced too far apart to be human, but they weren't quite right for any known animal either. Each print looked distorted, like the outline of a barefoot with too many toes. The tracks led him to the edge of a frozen stream. The ice shimmered faintly under the moonlight, and on its surface lay something half buried in frost. He brushed the snow away and froze. It was a piece of fabric, red and stiff with ice, a fragment of a jacket. He recognized it immediately. It matched the one Sarah wore in her last photo. Beneath it, something else caught his eye. A scrap of paper folded tightly, pressed flat against the ice as if placed there deliberately. He peeled it up with numb fingers and unfolded it carefully. The writing was faint but legible. "It's watching me." The words sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. He turned around sharply, scanning the dark again, heart pounding in his chest. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Is someone there?" His echo came back distorted, as though the forest itself was mocking him. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, then died. He slapped it against his palm, but the batteries were fine. It was the light that didn't want to stay on. When he finally managed to make it glow again, he saw something at the edge of the light's reach. A figure standing between the trees. It was tall, impossibly tall, the silhouette motionless. The outline was human but stretched, the limbs just a little too long, the neck tilted as if curious. Owen froze in place, unable to breathe. The air around him thickened, every instinct screaming to run. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. Only the whisper of snow falling from a branch broke the stillness. He stumbled back toward camp, every step heavier than the last. The fire had gone out. The recorder light blinked red on the ground, still running. When he picked it up, he noticed that the tape had continued recording even while he was gone. He pressed play. For the first few seconds there was only static and wind. Then came the sound of footsteps. His own, he thought, followed by another pair, slower and deliberate, echoing just behind. And then faintly a voice. It wasn't clear, just fragments, whispers buried under the static. It sounded like someone saying his name. He shut it off immediately and sat frozen by the dead fire, clutching the recorder to his chest. The night stretched on endlessly, filled with sounds that didn't belong to the living. He thought he saw flashes of movement between the trees, reflections like eyes glinting in the dark. Once he even saw the faint burst of light from what looked like a camera flash deep in the forest. But he hadn't brought any equipment capable of producing that. The realization hit him with a jolt of horror. Someone, or something else, was taking pictures. When dawn finally came, the forest looked peaceful again, as though the night's events had been nothing more than a dream. But the evidence was there. His tent was slashed open from the outside, long vertical tears through the fabric. The ground around it was covered in fresh tracks, the same distorted prints as before. But there were more now, circling his camp like something had walked around it all night. He packed his gear in a daze, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. He wanted to leave, to escape that cursed valley. But something compelled him to check the camera one last time. When he turned it on, he found 3 new photos that he hadn't taken. They were all from the night before, time-stamped between 2:00 and 2:05 a.m. The first showed him asleep in his tent. The second captured him standing near the frozen stream. And the third froze his blood. It was a close-up shot of his own face, eyes wide open, staring directly into the lens. He didn't remember that moment. He didn't even remember being awake. Shaken, he powered off the device and shoved it into his bag. As he began the long trek back toward the road, a sudden gust of wind swept through the forest, carrying with it the faintest sound of a shutter clicking in the distance. He turned around, scanning the ridge one last time. There was nothing there, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him leave. When Owen failed to check in by nightfall, a small search team was dispatched. They found his truck still parked on the roadside, engine off, keys in the ignition. His footprints led into the woods, but none came back out. The only thing they found was his camera lying half buried near the stream. Lens cracked, the memory card missing. Later, when technicians retrieved what they could from the device's backup storage, they found one final image time-stamped after dawn. It was taken from the ridge facing the valley below. In the distance, a single figure stood near a fire pit, its posture identical to the one in Sarah's last photo. But this time, the figure wasn't Sarah, it was Owen. And just like her, he was staring straight into the camera, as though caught in the act of vanishing. The snow never melts in that part of Alaska. Even when the rest of Fairbanks begins to thaw in spring, Screamer's Ridge stays buried beneath a white silence, untouched and unwelcoming. Locals say it's cursed, that the ground itself refuses to let go of what it has taken. A year after Detective Owen Carter's disappearance, that silence remained unbroken. His case, like Sarah Whitman's, had been quietly closed, another mystery swallowed by the wild. Official reports listed hypothermia as the likely cause, the same safe explanation used for half the vanishings that plagued Alaska's vast frontier. But the people who had known Owen, the ones who'd seen the look in his eyes before he left, didn't believe it.
He hadn't gone out there to freeze.
He'd gone searching for the truth, and perhaps he'd found it. It began again one summer morning, when a group of tourists from Anchorage came through the valley. They had rented snowmobiles despite warnings from locals about unpredictable terrain. One of them, an amateur drone photographer named Jamie Turner, wanted to capture the haunting beauty of the endless white wilderness. He launched his drone above the ridge and watched the live feed on his tablet as it glided over miles of silent snow. For the first few minutes, the footage was serene. Smooth aerial shots of frost-bitten trees and glacial shadows. But then the feed glitched. Static flickered across the screen. The drone's compass spun erratically. When the image stabilized, Jamie saw something that made him freeze. There was a figure standing in the middle of the clearing below. Not a shadow, not an animal, a person. They were dressed in a dark jacket, standing perfectly still beside what looked like a red Jeep half buried in snow. Jamie zoomed in, heart pounding. The figure's head lifted slowly, and for the briefest moment, they looked straight into the drone's camera. The feed cut out instantly, the connection severed. When he reviewed the footage later in the warmth of his cabin, the image was grainy but unmistakable. The face was clear enough to identify Sarah Whitman. Her features were exactly the same as they appeared in the missing posters, unchanged by time. She hadn't aged a day. There was no fear in her expression, no panic, only a strange calm as if she were waiting for someone. The footage spread online like wildfire. True crime enthusiasts, skeptics, and paranormal hunters all weighed in. Some claimed it was an elaborate hoax. Others insisted it was proof of something supernatural. The authorities dismissed it quickly, calling it a misidentification caused by shadows and digital distortion. But a few people in Fairbanks recognized the exact location captured in the clip. It was the same clearing where Sarah's backpack had been found, the same place where Owen's last footprints ended. Within a week, a small team of volunteer investigators made their way back to Screamer's Ridge, ignoring warnings from locals and weather alerts. Among them was Riley, the wildlife expert who had once accompanied Owen on his second trip. She hadn't spoken publicly about what she'd seen that night, but she carried her own quiet terror. She had heard the same clicking in the woods, the same inhuman wail that haunted her dreams. She wanted closure. But what she found was something else entirely. The team's first night at the ridge was uneventful. The cold was sharp, but the weather was clear. They documented everything with cameras and thermal scanners, determined to disprove the growing myth surrounding the place. Yet when the second night came, the wind began to change. The temperature dropped by 30 degrees in an hour. Their compasses failed just as before. The batteries in their cameras drained faster than expected. Then, as they gathered around their campfire, a faint clicking started somewhere in the dark. It was slow, steady, mechanical, like the sound of a shutter opening and closing. At first, they thought it might be an animal triggering one of the motion cameras they'd set up. But when Riley checked the equipment, she found the devices completely dead. The clicking continued, growing louder, circling the camp. The group fell silent, their breaths shallow. "It's just the wind," someone whispered, but no one believed it. The sound moved through the trees with deliberate rhythm. Not random, not natural. And then faintly beneath the clicking came another noise, a woman's voice. Riley turned her head sharply, straining to listen. It was distant at first, almost drowned by the sound of snow shifting underfoot. But then she heard it clearly. A whisper, carried on the wind, calling her name. She stood scanning the tree line with a flashlight, and for a moment she thought she saw movement. A flash of red fabric vanishing between the trees. Without thinking, she followed it, ignoring the others' shouts behind her. The forest was darker than she remembered. Her light bounced off the snow in harsh bursts, illuminating twisted branches that looked like reaching hands. She moved deeper until the sound of her companions faded. Ahead she saw a faint glow. It flickered like a campfire. When she reached the clearing, her breath caught in her throat. The red Jeep was there, half buried, frost-coated, the windshield cracked. And standing beside it, illuminated by the eerie orange light, was Sarah Whitman. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the glow. Her eyes shimmered like ice, reflecting the flames that burned without heat. She looked exactly like her photographs, down to the same braid in her hair and the same camera hanging around her neck. Riley took a step forward, whispering, "Sarah?" The woman tilted her head slightly, expression unreadable. Then she raised the camera slowly, the lens glinting. Riley froze as the shutter clicked once. The flash blinded her for a second, and when her vision cleared, Sarah was gone. The Jeep was still there, but the fire had vanished, leaving only cold darkness. Riley stumbled backward, heart racing, her flashlight flickering violently. She turned and ran toward camp, but no matter how far she went, the trees seemed endless. She screamed for her team, but only her echo answered. And faintly behind her, she heard the camera click again. By morning, the others found her collapsed near the ridge, her clothes torn, her hair matted with frost. She was alive but unresponsive, eyes open, staring at something none of them could see. She never spoke again. The story made national news. Officials blamed exhaustion and exposure, but the team's recovered footage told a different story. In the final recording from the night, taken from a tripod near the fire, several frames showed movement in the background. A figure walking between the trees, tall and slender, followed by another smaller one wearing a red jacket. Then, in the final seconds, the camera turned on its own, focusing directly into the lens as if something behind it wanted to be seen. After that, the site was declared off-limits by the state. Locals stopped going near the ridge altogether. Some say the land hums at night, vibrating with a faint electrical pulse. Others claim that if you go there after dark, you'll see flashes of light deep in the woods, like camera bulbs going off one after another. The strange thing is, sightings didn't stop there. Over the next few months, travelers passing through Alaska's remote trails reported hearing the same rhythmic clicking in the night. A few even claimed to have found photos on their phones, images they swore they didn't take, blurry shots of themselves sleeping, of the trees outside their cabins, of something standing just beyond the light. Years later, a researcher reviewing old case files came across Owen's and Sarah's photos side by side. When he overlaid them, aligning the tree line and shadows, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. In both images, far in the background was the same faint shape, tall, formless, and standing in the same position, as though it had been waiting for the camera to find it again. To this day, no one knows what really happened to Sarah Whitman, Detective Owen Carter, or the countless others who vanished in that part of Alaska. Some believe the ridge hides an ancient phenomenon, a place where time folds and people slip between worlds. Others think it's something else entirely, something alive drawn to those who try to capture it on film. But if you stand in the forest long enough in the quiet between the snow and the wind, you might hear it too. The faint click of a camera somewhere in the distance. And if you turn toward the sound, you might see a woman in a red jacket standing among the trees, her camera raised, her expression calm, her eyes locked on you. The shutter flashes once, and then everything goes dark, lost and never found.